What is up, guys? You got Not the Worst here, bringing another Black Desert online video. And today we are taking a look at some of the changes to the DK for the reworks, or at least what we have so far. There's a lot of new skill changes that we've seen for each set. So I'm going to be going through the Pre-Awakening, Succession, and then the Awakening sets to kind of break down each skill and what we're seeing that's different. So first up, let's get started with the Pre-Awakening changes. Okay, so first up, and one of the very large changes, is that the Dusk skill has actually been separated from Chain Dusk, and what I mean by that is they have independent cooldowns. Previously, you'd have to Dusk and then into Chain Dusk without removing your fingers off of the keys. So if you're going to be using Chain Dusk, it was in conjunction with Dusk no matter what. If you check it out now, you can actually Dusk. I could stop, and then while it's on cooldown, I could go again and then be using Chain Dusk from there. So as you can see there, like, very easy to just change direction or whatever, because you have a few seconds in between where that's actually off cooldown. So not quite exactly the same as having two iframes at all times, as if they shared the same two cooldowns, because if you did, of course, go and then into Chain Dusk, and now this one's up, your Chain Dusk is, of course, still on cooldown. It's not quite the same as good as that is, but still a very, very welcome change overall. Next up is Luscious Snare. This skill, I'm going to be honest with you, just kind of looks like it's not done yet. So you do this thing with the little roses, unprotected, whatever, and then 15 full seconds later, it's going to explode, and you'll see it here at some point while we're talking. I don't see any use for this in PvE whatsoever, because you're doing nothing. There it goes at that point. And in PvP, I don't get it. You'll just die. So not fully understanding what we were going for with that one. Pretty good chance that that's just the tip of the iceberg for what's planned with that. Next up, we have Obsidian Ashes and Smoky Haze. One, they have an interaction with each other, but Obsidian Ashes itself has been sped up quite a bit. You can move into other skills along with it, so that's very, very nice, as it's super slow. And then specifically, it has a really nice interaction with Smoky Haze. And the change to Smoky Haze being there's no collision either, which kind of works out in this setup if you choose to do it. You could potentially Obsidian Ashes, and you can see how I Smoky Haze while using the skill there to advance in. It can actually be pretty useful. Before that, Obsidian Ashes is kind of a neat skill. Maybe you're using it to pull if your Shadow Strike is down in PvE, PvP-wise. I definitely have used it in a lot of RBF situations where I know I can land the CC or something along those lines off of it for it. With that Smoky Haze interaction, if you know you're going to hit it, it's definitely got some interesting things that you can actually do with it. So not too bad at all. Definitely the speed up and the ability to not be just kind of locked into it is very huge. Next up, we have Airstrike. The skill itself is not necessarily changed here, but it has a flow interaction that's going to work with it, and the flow actually will also tie into Nocturne. So you're just going to Airstrike, and then to do the flow, you'll dash directly into that right there. The skill itself, I can't see having a lot of function for PvP other than, again, let's be honest, you're mostly using Airstrike either defensively in Awakening. Succession, you can use it a little more aggressively in some cases because you have that Dust Cancel. It's just super not safe in Awakening unless you're for sure going to land it. Kind of same thing here. I can't see it being an amazing setup that you're going to do to try to catch with that. Obviously, just gap closing, there's an option there. But the more interesting thing to this that you'll see is that this skill actually has a minus 20 DP debuff on it as well, same as your Spirit Legacy does. So where I can really see this being an application specifically in a PvE setup, more so than in PvP, is because you could use it for skill gaps, if you will, in between when you're actually doing your PvE combo, moving pack to pack, right? So if I go through and I've killed these packs, they're dead, and I want to move to the next one, my Spirit Legacy is not off cooldown, I could just Airstrike in, you see right there, and then I'd be on my next pack. They have the 20 DP debuff as well, so we're all set to go with that. So I can definitely see that getting used quite a bit there, and even at a minimum, just moving around from pack to pack. You've got a little extra jump there if you choose to hold on to it and not Dust Cancel in between. So pretty good looking skill there. It does interact, as I mentioned before, along with Nocturne. I don't see much use for this, to be honest with you, because it is kind of commonplace to use Lunacy of Vidir after Nocturne after Lunacy to kind of cover your gaps there when in Succession. Awakening may make some sort of use for this, but I'm not sure when you're going to. But you can just right mouse button at the end of the flow skill, and you'll go into Nocturne just like you would with say, Lunacy Vidir in Twilight Dash, even into the Succession setup. Next up, we have Repeated Annihilation. This skill was truly reworked here. This is actually a different option for what you do on your Nocturne. When using Nocturne, most commonly you're going to see it used, and then you'll either press down or S key for it, which then dashes you backwards or teleports you backwards, sort of, and you're in a forward guard block stance, as is, or most commonly you'll see the forward used, and this will teleport you behind the opponent, applies the debuff, and as you can see there, if you're watching how long the icon is, it's also a lingering super armor. So a lot of times, especially in 1v1 setups, you can use this to kind of wait out your opponent and maybe put in a slanted bounce to catch the CC afterwards there, assuming that they bait into the lingering super armor on your Nocturne setup. That's also assuming, of course, that you're not playing against a grab class that has a grab on, that's currently usable and not on cooldown, because you'll just get grabbed. You now have a couple of extra options. You can press A or D, and this is effectively using the Repeated Annihilation skill. What it's going to do, you'll likely be using D here. It essentially gives you more options other than your lingering super armor. In some cases, you do want to just back up with the S key using forward guard, but I can see a lot of usage for when you press D or the right mouse button. This will put you behind the opponent, and you're actually going to apply a float here. It's not protected like a slanted balance would be, but it is a float nonetheless. So you have a really good opening to land a CC if you're watching what your opponent's doing here. Get behind frontal guards. And if you could tell the other point to Nocturne there, just in general, this is actually going to come up when we get into the succession. It's got a little bit more distance. So definitely some more options there. It's not guaranteed that you're just going to go into the normal lingering super armor there and then maybe try a slanted bounce. You could actually go directly for that CC, pressing the D key to get behind your opponent. It's definitely going to be an option. And let's say you swing and miss. Guess what? You still got slanted bounce to follow up with that. Obviously, pretty much no use in PvE there, aside from you're just finishing out comboing a skill, or maybe you're getting fancy, you just killed a pack, something like that, and you want to just use the extended range to get over to the next pack. I don't know. We're stretching for things at that point. We also have an update to Corrupt Ground, although to be honest with you, it's not really much of a thing. There was an adjustment to the number of hits and this time that you get out of this skill. It's still going to be completely unusable unless you're like sub level 56 and you can't do it. It has a massive 20-second cooldown. The upside to this thing is it is a tier 3 add-on. However, with the state of the skill and the way that it is and has always been even prior to this air quote change along with it, it's just not usable. I mean, you're not going to come up to anyone and ever do that for any reason, because you'll just die. And even in PvE, like, this is just a waste of time. You're not using this skill for anything. So I wouldn't even say they started on this skill and they'll continue to maybe develop this one. Hopefully this honestly didn't do anything. Speeding up the animation by a split second and increasing number of hits or adjusting how the hits are applied is not a rework. It's a trash skill. It's been a trash skill. It's going to remain a trash skill. Now, we do have Shadow Strike, which I don't think I had spec'd out here. So let me put that on real quick and throw it on a hotkey. So Shadow Strike itself kind of changed how it interacts with other skills. Commonly, you could use this skill and cancel it pretty quickly when moving into other skills directly after it. So that's kind of been changed a bit with how it's applied, so that it's got interaction with the character's movement. So only after the attack are you able to do that. The actual advancement on it doesn't quite work the same as it did before, where you could just flat cancel the skill. You're going to have the skill, if we can target a weasel here, you're going to have the skill actually come out before you're able to just go ahead and pull that off. So a little bit of an edit there. Is that a buff, nerf? I don't know. It does work okay. Smoky hazing directly after it, so using it for pull there is pretty great. Again, not a huge PvP application other than the actual buff from it ever since they removed the bound that used to be on it. So, your mileage may vary on that one. So definitely some cool options there out of Pre-Awakening. Let's go ahead and get up the Succession specific stuff, which, as you can see, I'm spec'd into right now. But let's jump on over to those skills. Okay, so for our Succession updates, first of all, we don't really need to dwell on it, but the Obsidian Ashes change also carries over to the Prime version of it, so just that is noted there, so keep that in mind. Now for some bread and butter stuff, your Wheel of Fortune and Lunacy of Vidir. The range size of them is increased. To give you sort of an idea, if I give you an overhead, the size of where your Wheel of Fortune is landing, before it was right about where that very innermost circle is, if you look at the skill, is what the large extension of where it sits on live servers now. So kind of nice to have that one increased. The Lunacy to Vidir skill, it's a little trickier to actually see the range increase for it. It is there, but it's not as noticeable because the Wheel of Fortune is just a bit larger, same as it was before, just both increased accordingly. Lesser super usable though. Ravage Rake, the speed of this skill overall has been slightly increased to it, and specifically the second and third strike. The fourth absolute one works exactly the same as it always did. This, I mean, I guess nice. It's not a super noticeable speed increase for it. You're not really using this except, I mean, you hardly ever use this in PvE unless you, for some reason, need to fill in the gaps between cooldowns for skills in PvE, and in PvP, you're probably just stunting on someone with an extended Ravage Rate combo if you're using that there. Which you were already going to win the match without it anyhow, so not a huge impact. Then next up, we have Nocturne, which I mentioned in the Pre-Awakening kit a bit. The range increase in Succession for this was increased by 23%, so you have a very nice teleport type CC option or lingering super armor option from there. Pretty good increase. The idea here for what they were going was that to give Succession some more options from your opponent kiting you or keeping distance maintained on you, when of course you need to be on top of your opponent to really be dishing damage. Having some protected options or trickier options with Nocturne's nice, and your advance again with Obsidian Ashes is indeed a thing alongside Smoky Haze, which doesn't have collision. So pretty nice there. Just to note, the range for if you do go S for the forward guard was not increased, so keep that in mind as well. I don't believe they actually notated that was the case, but it is actually maintaining the same distance, so no increase from there. Airstrike itself has been sped up quite a bit, which you may have noticed again in the Pre-Awakening kit. The distance for it's still the same. Keep in mind you do have that flow, but the actual speed for it's there. You can still dust cancel as usual in Succession, but the time that you're getting from one point to another has been moved up quite a bit. Comma Slash has some new interesting interactions here with Smoky Haze, for instance. So if you're in Comma Slash, you can choose to Smoky Haze and then release it, which you couldn't necessarily do before properly, or you can pretty easily charge and release it at a much quicker pace so that you can actually easily get into some protection right afterwards. You don't have a very glaring kind of gap alongside it. And then a specific interaction with Comma Slash, along with a few other skills that I'll mention here, is that Lunacy of Adir has had its skill actually put into emotion, Shift RMB, so you don't always have to right mouse button that. Why is that nice? Because these skills tend to activate quite a bit quicker, and we now have some pretty good linkage options for that, so you can kind of stay pretty protected while watching out for your gaps. So the infamous Wheel of Fortune gap, which is definitely still a thing. You don't necessarily have to cover yourself in something like using your Smoky Haze, your Dusk cooldown at that time. You can actually link together into the Lunacy of Adir if you're using the key combination for it, that Shift RMB, and it's not entirely seamless, but it's pretty darn close. So we can see how fast those go between each other, and of course, I didn't even mean to just instinct hit right mouse button after Lunacy for Nocturne, which is pretty common. So SA trading here or looking for openings actually have some really nice options with that, and the not seamless, but the seam that there is very minimal, so that's pretty nice. And then I was trying to find a Grass Beetle or somebody to go into, finish up with a Nocturne there to kind of get it. That also does tie into, as I mentioned, Comma Slash. It will do it as well. And your Termination and Enforcement, maybe you just landed your combo, so you're finishing out your combo here. You can actually link that Lunacy directly in to get it in very quickly before you would have kind of a space, it would feel like, before you could actually lay that out. So a little more fluidity along with it, which feels just all around very, very nice. Really nice improvement, and just flat out having it as an option to actually put on your keys, Shift RMB, feels really, really good. So that's what we have for the Succession changes so far. If you were just looking for that part, let me know what you think about them in the comments below. But let me go ahead and let's get Respect, and we'll hop into the Awakening changes. All right, so let's get into Awakening and the can of worms that this has brought on. So first up, we have Touch of Exploitation. It's been changed so that it no longer has a bound on it. It has forward guard, and you can now choose to bond skill it. To pick up that bound if you want it, whereas previously you had to pick up bond skill, for the frontal guard on it. So, I mean, this skill is just useless, is kind of your issue here. Obviously, if you I don't know where you're doing this in PvP other than, again, just trying to stunt on someone with a terrible skill or something. PvE, you can maybe make an argument for this skill in a scenario where you cleared packs and you are low on cooldowns and you don't want to be silly using like Pervasive or something. So you're just like, you know what, I'll Touch of Exploitation in between because for some reason Spirit Blaze, which is just faster, especially with the flow, has better damage and makes more sense as a cleanup mob skill. For some reason, you're not using that. Again, this is one where we're kind of stretching to make use of. Skill was useless before, and it is still fairly useless. Not much of a change there. Hopefully, they come back to that one and touch it up a bit. In my opinion, what needs to happen here is this damage all needs to be applied in a single hit to make some sort of sense of this, so it's just flat protected damage, which the option of a bound on it when you select the bond skill, or you make this similar to your slanted balance skill, but not a CC without the bond skill, right? We want to make bond skills an actual option because it makes it extremely useful whereas like a bound on that skill is just I mean, you're just not picking it over a couple of other really great options you have. But if we had something more like slanted balance, apply the damage into a single hit and then give it like an option. So it was just like this with good damage on that one single hit, and then an option to put a float or something on it if you do select it for your bond skill. I think that's more in line with the way to go. We'll see what they kind of do with it from there. They did up the number of hits on it and thereby the damage a bit, but again, it's just not a skill. It's not a thing. Next up, we have Seed of Catastrophe and the Flow. These had their cooldowns reduced, Seed from 9 down to 8, and their Flow to it from 11 down to 8.5, just to make sure you're not going to exactly use both of them right on cooldown. If you wanted to, you'd be a half a second behind to be able to do both. And then more importantly, the Flow to it also got super armor applied. The regular one still does only if you select the bond, but what makes that interesting is because that's all protected now, if you choose the bond, is you are likely to see a lot more choices of the bond skill being on Seed of Catastrophe. Typically you see, it kind of depends on the matchup if you're in 1v1, but you typically see the Stiffen on Shattering Darkness, or you'll see the bond skill taken for Spirit Hunt, because you can actually use that and get behind frontal guards if you get the spacing for it just right. You can actually land the CC behind someone's frontal guard to Spirit Hunt, so depending on your matchup there, that might be used for it. This, you may see a little bit more Seed of Catastrophe, especially things like RBF or large scale, because now it wasn't really great because the Seed by itself, that super armor is not super lengthy, and the applications for when you're using Seed, especially in smaller scale PvP, is catching someone for that quick float, right? Like that's kind of the idea of what you're doing with it there. In this case, you can use it a little bit more, I'll say aggressively and as a poke, because you can almost every time decide to just chain it, whether you're advancing or going backwards, since you are protected. So some nice protected damage there. Options with a protected ranged float, should you choose the bond, is definitely going to be pretty handy. That's one of the very good changes that Awakening has seen so far. Next up, we have Grip of Grudge, and if you're a longtime DK player, you may still find yourself asking, what is the Grip of Grudge skill? Well, you're not alone, because it's this useless one, Shift F. And here's the thing: you saw, if you're familiar with the animation, looks like on live servers now, it's kind of just that center patch of whitish purple that's there. So you can see right away just from the animation alone that the range on this is increased as far as from left to right side. They also adjusted the damage and number of hits to it, so it should ideally hit more targets, get you a little bit more damage on it. The problem is, again, PvP application, this is useless. You just died because you used that skill, or again, you are already winning and just finishing a combo and you wanted to get some style points, so you Grip a Grudged them for that last little bit of HP, hoping you didn't screw it up right before their fairy pots them, because the damage is still pretty laughable, so they survive it anyways. Or for some reason you think that the pull effect or the turnaround in PvE is useful compared to, I don't know, any other skill you could be doing to just kill the mobs very quickly. So again, another instance of we had a useless skill that they didn't really rework, they just tweaked it a bit, and it's still useless, so that one's not getting anywhere. Next up we have, and this one I took personally, this is Cluster of Despair, and this time they did truly rework this skill. This skill has been changed from what it is before. Unfortunately, it's in almost every way, shape, and form changed for a bad way. What am I talking about? Well, here it is without the animation cancel to start with. Okay, so looks pretty cool, right? Here's the thing. Damage, it's okay-ish. It's not terrible. Obviously, the startup animation is a thing that's standing there and getting ready, similar with the live server Cluster of Despair. Not usable there. However, you can still cancel the startup animation the same that you can with the current Cluster of Despair by doing something like Dusk right before and then just Shift RMB, and it'll jump right into that portion. So again, that damage is not bad. You can see how it's widespread. The issue with this is that you have a 12-second cooldown, and this one, unlike the live version of Cluster of Despair, is not usable on cooldown. Okay, so you're not going to be able to use this nonstop whenever you want, and that is indeed a spammable tier 3 add-on on live servers. So your tier 3 add-on spammable on the PvE side is now completely gone, and on a 12-second cooldown, depending on where your gear's at, like for instance Bloody Monastery, I'm clearing these packs in about 6 seconds or so. So I'm not going to be able to, combo out, drop in this goofy thing at some point in between whatever skill for the tier 3, hop over to my next pack and get started and expect that I'm going to have my tier 3 add-ons, particularly like Bloody Monastery, where you're picking up like 15 human damage and 30 monster damage off your massive tier 3 add-ons, something that Succession doesn't have access to because LOL Corrupt Ground is the only tier 3 they have access to. So that's been kind of entirely nerfed. In addition to it, from the PvE standpoint, not just talking about that point, but in addition to it, the pull ability for this, it's still got some nice mid-range for it, but Cluster of Despair being spammable, you could have two groups like here and here, and you could just dash boom and then boom and pull both directly to you from there. So the range on it, while still a factor, it is something. You know what I mean? It's not that same like just spammable effect. Visually, it does look cool. Unfortunately, functionally, complete nerf in PvE. To talk about it from a PvP standpoint, I've thought about this and looked at it in different application, and other than forcing yourself to use it because you just want to, I just don't know where you're going to ever do this in PvP. And not just lose because you decided to do that. It's just unusable. To be honest, you probably end up locking it to prevent yourself from accidentally hitting right mouse button without shift, for instance. You wanted to go for Spirit Legacy and you accidentally just right mouse button, you do that, and now you just lost. You probably lock this skill, especially in 1v1, for trying to do that. So in this case, we had a skill that was actually usable in both PvP and PvE. Getting that movement speed debuff on Cluster on your opponent can be pretty handy, especially when they're staying ranged for a bit. This is something that went from usable in PvE and PvP. They truly did rework the skill. Unfortunately, they reworked it into a pretty much useless skill. So hopefully this is either reverted or this needs to be tweaked to get me to not complain about it. I mean, it's just hard to give a class a spammable tier 3 add-on and then actually take that away from them. When one of my number one complaints with Succession in general is that they don't have access to a tier 3 spammable add-on. I understand that this is the case for other classes as well, but I'm of the opinion if one class is getting a spammable tier 3 add-on, then all classes get a tier 3 spammable add-on. Why? Because we're trying to give balance here, and those add-ons are actually a huge deal. Lastly, a couple things. We have Shadow Bullet, which has actually been adjusted so you can use it in your Awakening set. So if you choose to pop that out because it's going to be your new movement speed range debuff that you had, since Cluster's not a thing, you can do that. And as you see, I'm now in Pre-Awakening set. So it actually switches you over, which is always handy to have different ways to swap into there. So you can work with that however you want to. That's a nice change. I'm 99% positive they decided to make it that way because they deleted that option in Cluster of Despair. And then lastly, we have a little bit of a speed up in animations for Spirit Legacy. It's supposed to be a bit smoother moving in. I'll be honest, I don't see any real world difference from this. Maybe in a side-by-side time comparison, you could see slight more smoothness between the two in the increase. So there you have it for the Awakening set as well. My overall thoughts for what I am seeing here. Succession does look very promising with a lot of the things going on. As I've just recently mentioned in the Awakening kit, I do want to see a spammable tier 3 add-on, or at least a usable tier 3 add-on. It doesn't necessarily need to be spammable, but give me something that's in the 10-second cooldown range that has tier 3 options on it, that's not Corrupt Ground, or honestly, just if you want to be lazy with it, but kind of like make it appeasing and make the skill usable, make Corrupt Ground usable on cooldown, which makes it spammable. And I'd like to also be able to dust cancel it after the first hit, but might be asking too much at that point. If you do that, you actually fix what you made, the mess that was made of Cluster of Despair and Awakening kit, and you finally give Succession an option for a real tier 3 add-on, whereas Awakening before it has spammable Cluster and Trap of Vidir as well as the Corrupt Ground option. So you actually kind of give it that choice there. Overall, the Succession stuff looks really, really great. I do hope that there's a little bit more tweaking with things moving forward. Awakening, on the other hand, we didn't really get anything here. The super armor on the Seed Flow is nice, but let's be honest here. I'm seeing focus on skills that did nothing that still do nothing, and in some cases just a flat out nerf in almost every aspect, no matter how cool it looks when using the skill. Awakening's pretty disappointing. The silver lining here is that I'm pretty certain, especially with some developer talks that they've had, that what we're seeing here is, instead of kind of fine-tooth comb going through each class like they did the first handful, and then decided let's go ahead and dump all the classes onto the lab server first, and then let's fine-tune from here. I'm hopeful that what we're seeing is just kind of where they were at, and the reason I say that is it looks like Succession was really put time and effort into, and Awakening wasn't. I'm telling you that the team working DK from here was potentially starting with pre-Awakening into Succession, and then going to Awakening from there, and when they were ready to release, they said, okay, here it goes on the Global Labs, and that's it. Why do I say that? Because did you guys know that's a skill? It's called Soul Snatch, and it's spacebar, and it also does nothing for Awakening, so that wasn't even changed at all, and I'm not sure that that's the play to go with. I don't think you're making an argument for that guy being usable anywhere, and that this is like fully thought out. Though fundamentally that animation is just what's making this not usable. So definitely something to left to be desired with Awakening. My true fear here is that we don't see more tweaks and true reworks, as the only skill I believe was truly reworked in Awakening was that Cluster of Despair, and for Succession, well, I guess both of them have the flow to airstrike. That was a true rework of a previous skill as well. And then Succession seeing more options with Nocturne chain ability and that sort of thing. A lot of speed up, shift R and B on Lunacy. I mean, it really got a rework. This got a couple of changes that would have been buffs or nerfs, and not in a great way. So hopefully we see some really cool things coming out in the next month or two while they fine-tune these reworks. And I'm fearful where I was going with that. What I'm fearful of is that we don't see that. Succession does look like it'll be pretty strong, at least on paper, but we don't know how other classes are going to stack up once everybody's been done. And I don't think Awakening, not that it's currently in a bad state and that this cluster change, makes it absolute trash, although I'm not happy about it. If it were left the way that it is and implemented alongside some of these other reworks we've seen, as Lawn that just recently came out, Striker, Zerker got a Q buff nerf. However, some of its other skills look really scary, and Warrior as well. Some of these reworks that are really fleshed out and look really finely tuned, I don't see this Awakening kit keeping up with that at all. And I also don't see a reason to really stick with Awakening other than the animations look cool as crap when you have some really, really nice options in the Succession setup. And then, of course, if we're talking like 1v1 duels, certain matches you just are going to be better off with Awakening because of the range type of thing outside of that. So that's what I think about it. Let me know what you guys think about each of the changes in the comments below. What would you like to see? Or I'd also be interested in some of your ideas on maybe skills they've already changed or something that they haven't, that they've overlooked that has some opportunity, kind of your theory crafting on some skill changes that could be done. I would be interested in seeing that as well if you want to let me know about that. With that said, that's going to be it for this video. I want to thank everybody for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and all that jazz. And if you do want to catch me playing live, there's a link to my Twitch page in the description down below. You can jump on over there, drop a follow, so you get notifications for that as well. I am going to be doing, if you catch this video the day it gets released, I am doing a costume giveaway courtesy of Pearl Abyss. For some Halloween costumes. There'll be a few of those going on for tonight's stream this evening that starts at 5 p.m. Eastern with the first giveaway starting around 6 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to at least jump in, I'm going to be doing them at the top of the hour, 6, 7, and 8 p.m. Eastern for the 3 costume giveaways. It's going to be for NA and EU PC only. So apologize for anybody on console or in a different area. That is what the coupon codes are going to work for. But definitely stop by and at least just jump in at the top of the hour, say what's up in the chat so you can get in for the giveaways there. Maybe get yourself some Cronstones if you need them, or if you did want to get maybe that Ramhorn Witch outfit for one of your characters because you're trying to show off some boobies. Listen, I hear you. Anyways, that's going to be it for this one. I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.